picture a collision, but like not two cars on a highway.
Right, something way more abstract.
Yeah, exactly. Picture a collision between two completely different languages. A scientist facing 20 months in a prison cell, desperately trying to use the laws of physics and network dynamics to prove his innocence.
Wow.
Right. While the judge staring down at him only understands the language of absolute authority and, well, compliance.
It is genuinely like trying to weigh I don't know, a philosophical concept on a digital scale.
Yeah.
The tools the court was using simply could not process the mathematical truth they were being handed.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, our mission is to examine an incredibly dense, fascinating stack of documents.
Oh, fascinating.
We are unpacking official court judgments, indictments, and a staggering 30,000-word blood letter written from inside a prison cell.
30,000 words. Just incredible.
Yeah. And the subject of this massive paper trail is Dr. Chen Jingyuan, who is a complex systems scientist. He was sentenced to 20 months in prison for the crime of picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
Yeah.
And his crime, it was based purely on a handful of retweets.
Now, before we really get into the weeds of the science and the law here, we need to establish a very clear boundary for you, the listener.
Yes, absolutely. To be totally clear, the materials we are unpacking today contain highly politically charged content.
Right.
We are talking about documents that include critiques of political systems and, content mocking national leaders. As your guides, we are not taking sides.
Definitely not.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the defendant, nor are we endorsing the state. Our mission is strictly to unpack the fascinating legal, scientific, and psychological mechanics of this case.
That is a crucial baseline. Because at its core, this isn't just a standard legal dispute,
Right.
It is a fundamental breakdown in human communication. It's the story of what happens when the rigid machinery of a judicial system goes up against, well, a mathematician who tries to mathematically disprove his own guilt.
So we have to start where this entire saga begins, with the official legal charges.
Yeah, the indictments.
Right. Because to understand the hardcore science that Dr. Chen brings into the courtroom later, you first have to understand the specific legal trap he was caught in.
So the charge used here, picking quarrels and provoking trouble, specifically regarding internet posts, it's built on 3 mandatory legal elements.
Okay.
For a conviction, the prosecution has to prove all 3. First, the defendant spread false information.
Right.
Second, subjective intent, meaning the person explicitly knew the information was false when they shared it.
Got it.
And third, the action must cause a serious disorder of public order.
So let's look at that first element, false information, because the prosecution's definition here was breathtakingly broad.
Oh, absolutely.
They didn't just target fake news articles, they classified art as a rumor.
Art.
Specifically, a political cartoon of a girl holding an umbrella. They took personal emotions, theoretical analyses of different political structures, historical critiques, and just dumped them all into the bucket of false information.
Which is, it's complete category error right out of the gate.
Yeah.
You cannot fact-check a feeling. You cannot scientifically verify the objective binary truth of an artistic metaphor.
Right. A cartoon isn't true or false in a legal sense.
Exactly.
Okay.
But where the prosecution's logic really begins to strain is on that second element, subjective intent. They had to legally prove that Dr. Chen knew these posts were fabricated rumors when he hit retweet.
Okay, let's unpack this, because they didn't use digital evidence to prove his intent.
Right.
It's not like they found an email or a private message where Chen said, hey, I know this umbrella cartoon is factually false, but I'm posting it anyway.
No, nothing like that.
Instead, the court utilized what psychologists call a representative heuristic. It's basically a cognitive shortcut.
Precisely. A mental leap, substituting for hard evidence.
Right. They argued that because Dr. Chen has a PhD, he has a high educational background. Therefore, the court reasoned he should be able to distinguish right from wrong. And thus, he must have known the posts were rumors.
It's wild logic.
It is. That's like saying because someone has a PhD in astrophysics, they automatically know whether a random historical quote on Twitter is a fabricated rumor. It completely confuses academic potential with factual omniscience.
What's fascinating here is the legal concept of objective imputation. The court entirely bypassed the burden of proof.
Right.
They swapped out the need for actual empirical evidence of his mindset with a societal stereotype of what a smart person should theoretically know.
Wow.
Yeah, and in criminal law, there's a very strict foundational principle called the consistency of subjectivity and objectivity.
Okay, what does that mean?
It means you cannot punish someone's objective action, like hitting the retweet button, based on a presumed subjective mindset without hard proof.
Ah, I see.
But relying on his PhD as evidence of his intent, the court just relied on a cognitive bias.
So his legal arguments pointing out these fallacies just fall on totally deaf ears. The court assumes his intent based on his degree, which brings us to a massive pivot in the case.
Yeah, the shift.
Dr. Chen realizes that arguing the law is getting him nowhere. So he targets the third legal element, the requirement that his retweets caused serious public disorder.
Right.
He abandons the legal textbooks and he turns to hard mathematics.
And this is where the genius of his defense really shines. If the prosecution claims his retweets caused a massive, serious disruption to public order, well, Dr. Chen, as a complex systems scientist, realized he could mathematically prove that such a result was physically, statistically, and mathematically impossible.
Let's talk about how he actually did this, because it is wild. He modeled his own Twitter behavior using something called the Galton-Watson branching process.
Yes.
Can we break down how that actually works?
Absolutely. So the Galton-Watson process is a mathematical model originally developed in the 19th century to study the extinction of family names.
Okay.
But today, it is heavily used in epidemiology to track how a virus spreads through a population. Think of the R0 value we hear about with viruses.
Right. How many people one infected person will subsequently infect?
Exactly.
Yep.
Dr. Chen adapted this exact epidemiological model, but instead of tracking a virus, he was tracking the spread of his retweets.
And he combined this with an analysis of scale-free networks. Now, for you listening, a scale-free network is basically the underlying architecture of social media.
Right.
It means the network isn't evenly distributed. You have a few massive accounts, celebrities, politicians with millions of followers, and then millions of tiny accounts with almost zero followers.
Right. So in network dynamics, those massive accounts are called hub nodes, and the tiny ones are peripheral nodes or edge nodes.
Got it.
Dr. Chen analyzed his own account data and proved mathematically that he was deeply peripheral. He had fewer than 100 followers.
Barely anyone.
And furthermore, he showed that the vast majority of those followers were inactive zombie accounts.
Right, so he calculates his mean offspring number, which, in his mathematical model, is represented by the Greek letter lambda, right?
Yes, Lambda.
It's the social media equivalent of the R0 value. It tells you the average number of new retweets generated every single time he hits share. And his lambda wasn't just low, it was practically non-existent.
Right. He even ran the numbers conservatively to give the prosecution the benefit of the doubt. He assumed a lambda of 0.1.
Okay, so what does that mean in plain English?
That means for every 10 times he shared a post, it might generate exactly one new retweet from his followers. Using the Galton-Watson equation, he demonstrated that the probability of his retweet dying out immediately, what mathematicians call the extinction probability, was over 99.9%.
So he hits retweet, maybe one person scrolling at 2 a.m. sees it and shares it, and then it just completely stops dead.
Exactly. The average cascade size of his posts was less than 1.2 retweets.
That's nothing.
Right, so he takes all this peer-reviewed math, and he concludes that the probability of his single retweet triggering a massive cascading societal disruption was mathematically less than 10 to the power of -10.
That's a tiny number.
In probability theory, an event with those odds is officially classified as an almost impossible event.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate here, what about the butterfly effect? We hear about that all the time with viral content.
Oh, sure.
Couldn't one tiny retweet, even from a nobody account, flap its wings, hit the algorithm just right, and cause a hurricane of public disorder?
It's a great question, and it's exactly the kind of pushback a prosecutor might try. But Dr. Chen anticipated this. The butterfly effect is a real physical phenomenon, but has very strict preconditions.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It only works if a system is hovering at the edge of chaos. In physics, this is measured by something called a positive Lyapunov exponent.
Wait, what does a positive Lyapunov exponent actually look like in real life?
Think of a perfectly balanced boulder resting on the absolute peak of a mountain. It is highly unstable. A single gust of wind, a tiny perturbation, will send it crashing down into the valley, causing an avalanche.
Sure.
That is a system at the edge of chaos.
Right.
But social networks, as Dr. Chen pointed out, are not perched on a mountain peak. They are normally in what's called a subcritical state.
So instead of a boulder on a peak, it's more like a marble sitting at the bottom of a heavy ceramic bowl.
Yes.
If you flick the marble, it rolls around a bit, but the shape of the bowl naturally absorbs the energy, and the marble quickly settles back to the center. It dampens the shock.
That is a perfect metaphor.
Uh,
A minor perturbation from an edge node like Dr. Chen doesn't ripple out indefinitely, it decays exponentially.
ah.
He argued that blaming him for societal chaos is scientifically equivalent to blaming a single spark falling into the Pacific Ocean for causing a forest fire.
The environment simply cannot support the chain reaction.
Exactly.
That ocean metaphor is incredible, and his math is utterly flawless. He literally proved a negative using epidemiology models.
Yeah, he did.
So why didn't the judge listen? Why did she still get 20 months in prison?
Well,
I mean, the discrepancy here tells us this was never actually a legal debate. It was a psychological one.
exactly. This is where we shift from the math to the psychological clash happening in that courtroom.
Right.
When we analyze Dr. Chen's personality profile based on his defense strategies,
Mm.
we see a textbook example of someone with high openness and high conscientiousness.
Okay.
But his conscientiousness is driven entirely by internal logical consistency, not by external societal rules. He also exhibits low agreeableness, meaning he isn't going to just nod his head, plead guilty, and comply just to make things go smoothly.
Here's where it gets really interesting. He literally framed his defense around the CCAP theorem from computer science and Gödel's incompleteness theorems from mathematics.
Yes, and we should explain why that is so wildly antagonistic to a judge.
Please do.
Gödel's incompleteness theorems prove that in any sufficiently complex mathematical system, there are statements that are true, but absolutely unprovable. Math cannot always prove its own absolute truth. And the CAP theorem essentially states that in a distributed network, you cannot simultaneously have consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. You have to make trade-offs.
So Chen is standing in front of a judge using these deep mathematical proofs to argue a philosophical point.
Yeah.
He's saying, if mathematics and computer science prove that absolute verifiable truth is inherently unknowable or requires trade-offs, how can you legally demand that I possessed absolute factual certainty when I retweeted a political meme?
It is a brilliant epistemological argument. But now look at the psychology of the judicial system he was speaking to.
Right, completely different mindset.
Exactly. A judicial system is driven by security motives and system maintenance. It relies heavily on groupthink, confirmation bias, and strict hierarchical obedience to authority.
During the trial, the judge actually yelled, "Shut up," at Dr. Chen.
Yeah, literally yelled at him.
He flat out refused to let Chen explain his Galton-Watson models or his scale-free network data. And a prosecutor even admitted off the record that they were ordered by upper management to make this an ironclad case, regardless of what the actual scientific facts were.
You have an individual demanding a nuanced debate on epistemology and network dynamics, standing in front of an institution whose sole psychological drive at that moment is to eliminate uncertainty and enforce total compliance.
Chen was trying to use a completely rational, logical language to educate a system that only speaks the language of compliance and threat reduction.
Yes.
It's like trying to unlock a heavy steel door by reading a math textbook out loud to it.
That's a great way to put it.
The door doesn't care how elegant or flawless your math is, it only responds to a physical key.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we can see a classic, real-time example of the fundamental attribution error.
Right. What is that exactly?
This is a cognitive bias, where we attribute someone's actions to their underlying character rather than their environmental circumstances. The judicial system viewed Chen's complex scientific defense not as a genuine search for objective truth, but as arrogant, malicious defiance.
Wow.
The system needed a submissive suspect so they could process the case quickly and close the file. Instead, they got a scientist seeking a peer-reviewed debate.
Because to Dr. Chen, submitting to the charge meant betraying his core identity as a scientist.
Exactly.
If he pled guilty, he would be legally admitting that he caused a statistical impossibility.
Precisely. His psychological resilience was tied entirely to his intellectual integrity. To yield would mean agreeing that a spark could ignite the ocean.
Right.
And on the flip side, for the court, allowing his scientific defense to stand would mean officially admitting their legal framework for categorizing false information was scientifically flawed. Neither side could back down without completely shattering their own psychological foundation.
Which brings us to the final and definitely the most intense phase of this case.
The letter.
The math failed. The psychology violently clashed. Dr. Chen was locked away. But he had one outlet remaining. From inside his prison cell, he painstakingly wrote a 30,000-word document.
Which is massive.
It's referred to as his blood letter. And this document elevates his entire situation from a local courtroom dispute into a massive global question of human rights.
The blood letter is far more than a standard legal appeal. It operates as a phenomenological argument.
Okay, break that down for us.
Now, what that means in this context is that Dr. Chen strips away the complex network models and the legal statutes, and he presents his raw physical reality.
Right.
He writes, "My bleeding life is the ultimate proof of my grievance."
Mm-hmm.
He is using his literal physical suffering in that cell as the undeniable empirical evidence of the system's failure.
And he goes on the offensive. He accuses the judicial system of operating as a judicial mafia.
Very strong words.
Yeah, he points out that their actions directly violate the country's own constitutional principles. He even takes the government's own macro-political slogans against them, arguing that criminalizing the sharing of international art and thought violates their official mandate of building a community with a shared future for mankind.
The analysis of his letter also grounds his case firmly in international law, specifically examining it under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, and the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights.
Let's translate those long acronyms into what they actually mean for a human being.
Good idea.
Article 19 of the ICCPR protects freedom of expression, which explicitly includes the freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers.
Yes.
And Article 15 of the other covenant protects your right to take part in cultural life and enjoy the benefits of scientific progress.
Exactly. When a court criminalizes the act of saving a political cartoon or sharing a theoretical political science paper, they're directly violating those foundational human rights. They are making intellectual curiosity illegal.
Okay, but playing devil's advocate one more time, why should someone listening right now care about this?
It's a fair question.
If they aren't a complex systems scientist and they don't live under that specific judicial system, isn't this just an isolated tragedy happening to one guy? Why does his letter matter to you and me?
You should care because of the chilling effect and how easily this legal logic can spread.
Okay.
This case establishes a terrifying precedent. It means that simply viewing, saving, or sharing non-mainstream ideas purely for research or curiosity can be retroactively criminalized based on assumed intent.
Right, the old, you have a degree, so you should have known better trap.
Exactly. It replaces the foundational legal requirement of actual measurable harm, the exact thing Dr. Chen mathematically proved he didn't cause, with the subjective paranoid fear of an idea.
Wow.
If any justice system, anywhere, can completely ignore objective reality and the laws of physics just to punish a thought, then the boundary of what is considered a crime becomes completely invisible.
It's just gone.
Right. It means anyone's intellectual curiosity, yours included, can be classified as a threat to public order just because someone in power felt threatened by it.
So what does this all mean? We have explored how an incredibly brilliant scientist used branching process mathematics and scale-free network dynamics to fight an unjust legal charge.
Yeah.
We've seen how his flawless logic was ultimately crushed by the psychological groupthink of a system that quite literally lacked the cognitive tools to understand his language.
Completely.
For you, the listener, it's a stark, powerful reminder of what happens when the algorithms of human logic clash with the rigid, unyielding machinery of authority.
It reminds us that justice is rarely just about what is written objectively in the law books.
Right.
Justice is heavily dictated by the cognitive biases, the psychological motives, and the systemic hierarchical pressures of the flawed human beings enforcing those laws.
Yeah.
When a system prioritizes its own compliance over objective truth, even the laws of physics aren't going to save you.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought to take away from this deep dive. We've spent this entire time dissecting the massive flaws of human judges, their confirmation bias, their reliance on social stereotypes, their total inability to process Dr. Chen's mathematical defense.
Right.
But what happens in the near future when our justice systems are inevitably handed over to artificial intelligence?
Oh, wow.
Will an AI judge side with the strict, unfeeling rules of the legal code, punishing the individual without an ounce of context? Or will it finally understand the mathematical logic of the peripheral node?
That is fascinating.
Right. Will it be able to read that math textbook, unlock the door, and clearly see the absolute truth that a single spark cannot set the ocean on fire?
This raises an important question about whether removing the human flaw from our courts also removes human empathy, or if it simply allows objective truth to finally have a voice in the room.
It's definitely something to mull over the next time you hit the retweet button. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.